What an example to us the man Jesus Christ was. He was always giving. He always had the other person in mind. He was always reaching deep and extending himself to help. And that included when he was hanging on the cross. And one of the things that Jesus Christ said from the cross has been misunderstood and mistaught, and we need to see if we can get this straightened out. Reading in Matthew chapter 27, verse 46 from the New International Version says, "And about the ninth hour their time was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon for us. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, about the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, 'Eli, Eli, Lama Sabactani,' that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And what has happened is people have read this and they haven't understood the culture or what's going on, and so they've said, oh, God forsake Jesus. Jesus became sin, and God forsook Jesus because Jesus was sin. And you know, that's not true. That's not the case. God does not forsake people because of sin. Well, that's obvious in my life. I would imagine that's obvious in your life too. God does not forsake people because of sin, and he certainly didn't forsake Jesus Christ because of sin. And did Jesus Christ know he was going to have the sin of the world and be the sin offering for mankind? Absolutely. And on the eve of his arrest, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and the men came to arrest him, and Peter grabbed a sword and started to defend Jesus Christ, what did Christ say? Here in Matthew chapter 26, verse 53, he said, put your sword away. Don't you think I can't call on my Father and he would at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? That's 72,000 angels. Jesus Christ wasn't afraid of the crucifixion. He prayed that he wouldn't have to die, but he willingly accepted God's will for his life and died for you and for me. And then on the cross, he makes this interesting statement, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And what was he doing? Once again, he was living for the people. He was quoting Psalm 22, verse 1, which is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Psalm 22 was one of the beloved psalms in the Hebrew culture. Just like today, we love Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And that section of Psalms was well known and well loved. So when Jesus Christ from the cross said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's like me saying to a bunch of Christians, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not," and then they fill in the blank, "I shall not want." And when Christ quoted Psalm 22:1, the audience there could then fill in the blank in their mind because they knew the psalm. They knew Psalm 22. It was a well-beloved psalm. And you know what Psalm 22 is about? Jesus Christ. It's a messianic psalm. And for anyone who had eyes to see and ears to hear, anybody that would play that psalm back through their mind would sit and have to say, wow, this is it, isn't it? We're really looking at the Messiah. Look at what the psalm says. In verse 4, "In you our fathers put their trust." They trusted and you delivered them. And Jesus Christ, like David before him who wrote the psalm, was looking for deliverance. Verse 6, "But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by men and despised by the people." Interestingly enough, I'm a worm. The word worm there, it's that worm that was crushed for red dye. In Exodus chapter 25, verse 4, it's actually translated as scarlet. And here's Jesus Christ covered with blood. He said, I'm like one of those crushed worms. I'm scarlet. You could look at his body. He looked scarlet. And not a man, what did he say? Despised by the people. What did Isaiah 53 prophesy of the Messiah? He was despised and rejected by men. People would be playing Psalm 22 through their mind and, wait a minute, he's crushed like a red worm, and he's despised. That's kind of what's going on with the guy on the cross there. Verse 7, "All who see me," 22:7, "all who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, let the Lord rescue him." That's amazing. If you read Matthew 27:43, that's exactly what the enemies of Christ at the bottom of the cross were saying. He trusted in the Lord, let the Lord deliver him. 1,000 years before Christ hung on the cross, God foreknew what those men would say and wrote it in the Psalms. And you can just see a believer saying, that thing about trusting in the Lord, that's part of the Psalm. They just said it to that guy on the cross. And there ought to be dawning in the mind of the people. There should be anyway. Wow, we're looking at the Messiah dying here. In verse 11, in Psalm 22, it says, do not be far from me. Look at his prayer to God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there's no one to help. You ever been there? Jesus Christ was. John chapter 16, verse 32 says that after they came to arrest him in the garden, all the disciples left. And so the psalmist says there's no one to help. And truly there wasn't in Christ's life. He at that point was hanging on the cross. There were some faithful onlookers, but he was hanging on the cross by himself. Verse 14, Psalm 22, I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. Wow, my bones are out of joint. But remember the prophecy that's spoken about in John 19:36, that none of his bones were broken. It's amazing that Jesus Christ could go through the beating he went through and feel like his bones were out of joint. He'd been stretched and beaten, but yet not one bone was broken. What a miracle, what a witness. Verse 15 of Psalm 22, my strength is dried up like a potsherd, which is a piece of broken pottery. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. You know, this thing about his tongue sticking to the roof of his mouth. Remember, even when he said, Eli, Eli, they said, oh, he's calling for Elijah. He'd bled so much, he'd lost so much fluid, it had been so long since he'd had any water that even his tongue was starting to swell a little bit and his words were a little unclear. And even that was foretold back in Psalm 22. Wow, my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. He went through this for you and me. Wow, this is great. Verse 16, dogs have surrounded me. Of course, dogs are evil men, Gentiles. A band of evil men have encircled me. Verse 16, last part of the verse, they have pierced my hands and my feet. Now I can hear somebody back at 1000 BC when David wrote this psalm saying, David, what's the deal about the piercing the hands and the feet? See, crucifixion hadn't been invented yet. And David just say, hey, I'm just writing down on the psalm what the Lord tells me. I don't have a clue what this piercing the hands and feet mean. 2,000 years later, imagine the impact of reciting Psalm 22 in your mind and going, that guy got his hands and feet pierced. He's the Messiah. Verse 18, they divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. And we know that's exactly what happened at the base of the cross. They divided his clothes and cast lots for them. And then verse 31, the great closing verse of Psalm 22, they will proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, for he has done it. And interestingly enough, the Aramaic of he has done it is finished. And that's exactly what Christ said. He quoted the first verse, my God, why have you forsaken me? He quoted the last verse, it is finished. And the whole time, I just believe he was hoping and praying that somebody would hear what he was saying, read and look at what was going, this is God's Son. This is the Messiah. This is the one whose tongue cleaves to the roof of his mouth, who people are mocking, where they're dividing his garments, and his hands and his feet are pierced. And Jesus Christ spoke those great words, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because he loved the people, and to his dying breath he was witnessing and trying to show people that he was the Messiah. He was who he says he is, the way, the truth, and the life.
Some days I forget that I'm free, and sometimes my feet don't wanna carry me, but I just remember what you went through, and I'm gonna